fact, the ongoing Oromo protests are unprecedented since 1970s revolution, which toppled the late Emperor Haile Selassie. To provide some context and add sort of a human face to the ongoing crackdown on the Oromo protests, the protests began in November of 2015 in response to the so-called Addis Ababa Master Plan, which sought to expand Addis Ababa, Ethiopian capital's boundaries into the surrounding Oromia region. The master plan, which the authorities scrapped in January following widespread protests, would have expanded Addis Ababa's current boundaries from 54,000 hectares to about 1.1 million hectares. That is 20 times the city's current boundaries. It would have placed 36 Oromia towns in 17 districts under Addis Ababa's jurisdiction. For some perspective, for those of you from Washington, D.C. area, Addis Ababa is much larger than D.C., but imagine for a moment expanding D.C.'s boundaries by 60 times without consulting with the surrounding states, and then also compensating those who will be forced to move from their homes. And I hope you can begin to understand the extent of the problem we face. For the roughly 6 million Oromo farmers who were never consulted but were on the path of this massive urban development scheme, the plan meant displacement from their ancestral lands, a loss of livelihood, but also their cultural identity. So far, more than 400 people have been killed, thousands have been wounded. Victims include children as young as 8-year-old, the elderly, and even pregnant women. Thousands of Oromo youth continue to be hoarded into overcrowded concentration camp-like detention centers across the country, where torture is a commonplace. Those detained are not charged with any crime, do not have access to lawyers, and can be held there for a very, very long time without anybody knowing their whereabouts. Mr. Bekele Garba, the deputy chairman of the Oromo Federalist Congress, which is an opposition party in the country, has been in jail since December. He has not been charged with any crime, and he's seriously ill. In fact, Ethiopia's rulers continue their double-speak by trying to downplay Oromo people's long-standing grievances to issues of bureaucratic red tape in reducing corruption using the euphemism of good governance. It is important to understand that while the master plan served as the immediate trigger for the current uprising, the underlying cause is the frustration and anger at the Oromo people's continued economic, political, and social marginalization in the Ethiopian state. In town after town across Oromia, the protesters have been chanting, "Oromia is not for sale, killing is not an answer to Oromo's grievances, free Oromo political prisoners, we want genuine self-rule." Ethiopia's rulers have become adept at using high-sounding buzzwords such as democracy, rule of law, good governance, and development to evade scrutiny. Yet what is surprising, at least to me, is their foreign backers, including US government officials, are quick to accept those empty promises at the face value. That's not all. Sadly, the US government continues to prioritize short-term security and counter-terrorism objectives in its relationship with Ethiopia. Just earlier this month, the US Africa Command signed a new defense agreement with Ethiopia, outlining broad-ranging security cooperation, including equipment, military training, intelligence sharing, logistics support for Ethiopian defense forces. The very unit that is implicated in killing more than 400 protesters in the last 4 months. To remedy this very complex and difficult situation, I make the following recommendation. Congress should immediately suspend all counter-terrorism funding to Ethiopia, and I know that Congress has the means to do this under the Leahy Law, and there are other instruments. Second, to break the impasse in Ethiopia, the US should facilitate a dialogue between the Ethiopian government and various opposition movements, both at home and abroad, toward opening up the political space for dissenting voices in civil society. Congress should also increase funding for human rights and democracy promotion in Ethiopia, impose strict conditionalities on human rights on bilateral and multilateral aid. Congress should urge Ethiopia to immediately and unconditionally release all political prisoners. And finally, US officials in Ethiopia should actively monitor all political trials and the treatment of prisoners, including visits to prisons in Addis Ababa, but more importantly, detention centers across the country where there is no media or another publicity. I thank you for your time.